What we will do is we're going to try to talk about a synergy between machines and people in the context of three interrelated topics. One's imaging, one's robotics, and the last is surgery. But I thought that we need to go back and get some context of what people do in modern day surgery. Or what is the history of surgery? This oil painting is from the late 1400s. And we know then that perhaps a lot of brain surgery was based on religious ideas. We could probably envisage this priest or monk instructing this charlatan or surgeon on where to put a head or a trephination in this man's head to release an evil spirit. The artist of this very famous painting, though, included a woman sitting here looking upon this interplay between religion and medicine. And perhaps this book on her head was placed there so that she could record events of the next several centuries. So we will jump ahead to the early 1930s. This is a very important slide. It comes from the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. It shows an individual. His name is Harvey Cushing. But I want to make 3 points on this slide. One is that before Cushing conducted this operation at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Paul Broca and his contemporaries over the 1800s began to look at people and began to correlate neurological function based on clinical examination and pathological examination of those people. It was because of that work that Cushing knew where to make his opening on that person's head. And he was probably in a reasonable geographical space on that individual's head for this procedure. The second point I want to make on this slide is technologies of the time in the 1930s were brought into the operating room. It's in the 1926. This little thing sitting off to the side is immensely important in surgery. Cushing was able to go across the street to MIT, talk to a fellow by the name of Bovey, and electrocautery made its way into the operating room. And surgeons had hemostasis, not only for neurosurgery, but for oral surgery. A contemporary of Cushing by the name of Walter Dandy, 10 years before, went and asked General Electric, "I can't see when I'm operating. What do you think we could do about it?" Solution, a light bulb attached to a coat hanger off of Cushing's head, and people could see the operative site. The third point I want to make on that slide is these folks in the background. Surgery then, and even up until now, is based on an apprenticeship model. People came to Boston, they looked at surgery, they went back to their homes and their home countries and mimicked the technique and the process of this operating room. Things continued to change. And one of the big things that changes in surgery is the movement of machines into the operating room space. In the 1970s, CT scan is invented. In the late 70s and early 1980s, magnetic resonance imaging becomes an invention. In the late 1990s, surgeons took these technologies and put them in the operating room. That provided both exquisite lesion localization, or the localization of the problem inside the body, as well as surgeons were able to narrow what is called the differential diagnosis. And they became relatively certain before they operated on what they're about to be operated upon. I also show here a microscope. It was an accidental happening into the neurosurgical operating room in the 1960s. It resulted in a virtual revolution in neurosurgery. Surgeons began to narrow their surgical quarters because they could see and they could magnify. Instruments became smaller, and surgeons, together with these imaging techniques that you see, continue to be pushed towards the limits of their precision, their accuracy, their dexterity, and their stamina. What is the solution to that problem? And I'm going to argue another machine. Here you see a machine that's also entered the space, a robot, that is going to be controlled by a surgeon at a remote workstation. The theme there is we're going to couple the best of a machine, precision and accuracy, to the executive capacity of a human brain. You might say, why would you want to do that? These are MR images from the operating room. They show a lesion in this person's brain. They also show the function of the brain and the interconnectivity of the brain. So would it not be wonderful if surgery took place not outside this image, but inside this image? And I wanted to share with you an operative site. What do I mean you're pushed to the limits of what you are capable of doing? Here is a picture of a young man. It's a picture of him underneath his right frontal lobe. So you have to use a bit of your imagination. We're looking inside his head. This is his right optic nerve behind the globe. This structure here is the main artery that has pierced the skull and is going to supply the right side of his brain. The tumor sits in this little working space, about 5 millimeters. The surgeon must work within the confines of that space to take out a complex circular lesion. That's the title, Beyond Our Reach. So now, Cushing went across the street to MIT, and he saw this guy by the name of Bovey, and they brought electricity in the operating room. Well, what can we do in this particular century to augment how we would deal with the problems of surgery? We have tremendous connectivity. We have way more engineers and scientists. We have people building international space stations in outer space. We can take the cumulative efforts of our global community and apply them to a problem. And that ought to make the similar result that Cushing did by talking to one individual so many years ago. That's a picture of NeuroArm. But the point that I want to make on that slide is not NeuroArm. It's to think about a machine and the computer processing that controls the machine. Computers operate in a linear manner. They need to have the data and they can execute a solution. This machine needs to be coupled to something that is faster, while synaptic transmission is much slower than a computer processor. The human brain makes a decision based on a sparse, incomplete data set. You can guess what it might be, and based on that guess, we become much faster than computers. Coupling that to the machine will cause a synergistic effect. There's something else though. The community is strong. We have physicists, we have engineers, and we have folks from around our globe pushing the limits of what we can do. So here I say we're beginning to work inside the image. We can, using engineering principles, conduct electrical highways from the surface of a brain to its target. Our tools can only go down those electrical highways. Surgeons who are operating in confined spaces will have no-go zones, similar to pilots that fly around our planet. And we need to recreate the sound, I've got a microphone here, the touch using hand controllers, and the sight of surgery. But we can do that at a remote place. We won't be like Cushing standing by a person than what she is operating on. We can be in a different room or a different city or a different country and conduct a similar procedure. The surgeon's at a workstation interacting with the image. This just shows a modern day operating room. Contrast that to what you saw with Cushing. We manipulate robotic systems to conduct the surgical procedure while working at a workstation. We are creating a digital matrix. Everything is digital. And that means, if we think about it, we can not only play back the operation, we ought to be able to play it forward for rehearsal. Things have changed. The people can be in their houses. We can all be connected by this. We can have developed and developing nations interconnected on our planet in the performance of surgical procedure. It's not about Canada, the United States, and our Olympics. This is a communicative effort of all peoples of our planet to push the boundaries of what is possible. Where is surgery going? You might have thought that you've taken a trip to where it's going. That's where it is. Where might surgery go? People have put such machines down the bores or apertures of magnets or CT scanning on our planet to conduct surgery within the image. And I show here we can, in our operating rooms, acquire function. You saw the interconnectivity that can be imaged with MR. This is a functional image of a person's brain. This is a noun verb task that is given to the person to think about while they're being imaged. And it shows the relationship of substructures to this particular individual's tumor. Here we see this person's brain. On this is the left side of the brain. There's a tumor coming to the surface. Surgeons can take out that tumor through narrow corridors, but they may not take out the cells. Neuroscientists are able to stain different cells in different ways. We ought to be able to highlight the tumor cell with a fluorescent or a visual marker during surgical procedure. It ought to be possible for surgeons to interact with the cells of the brain and remove pathologic cells that may be wished to be moved, or to insert something into a collection of abnormal cells in whom one wants to modulate. So in conclusion, where does all of this go to? Why do people do it? It all comes back to the individual who suffers the neurological sequelae of a disease. And there is certainly, and by having a worldwide effort, we oughta, as a community of people, be able to correct the problem that people become suffering with as time goes by. Thank you.